at the coronation banquet of King Charles.
Can I just ask you, Charles, I imagine your feelings on that day might be quite mixed. I'll be totally honest with you, those of us with memories of your sister Diana, I think many of us, my generation, Fee's generation, we'll be thinking of her. And I hope that is not offensive, but I think she'll be in our minds.
I think it's very complimentary, actually. But, I mean, obviously I think of Diana every day, but in different contexts. And the whole royal thing doesn't really... I don't find it as interesting as a lot of people. Do you know what I mean? I just get on with my life. And I look after what I have to look after in the estate, and I have a career and write books, etc. So I don't really... people obviously assume that I care a lot about that side of things, but it's just a side
But
part of my life.
Would you like to ride your horse into the banquet and throw a gauntlet down?
Only if you were there to look really jealous, Richard, because I know you would prefer to do it.
Rabbit Hole Detectives is the name of the new podcast about history. It's a popular history podcast, I think it's fair to say, with host Charles Spencer, Dr. Kat Jarman and the Reverend Richard Coles. Now, I was a bit rude earlier and suggested that perhaps they were convenient showbiz pals. But actually, Richard, you've written, I know, about your grief after the loss of your partner.
Yeah.
And actually, Charles and his wife Karen were hugely supportive. So what is it that makes a good friend at a time like that?
Well, specifically in the case of Charles and Karen, was having a house with security and a high wall gate, because after David's death there was a lot of interest and some of it was very intrusive, and I was a bit of a mess, actually. So they very kindly took me in, and they gave me, not only took me in, but also I had some privacy, which was really good. But actually they were just good friends. They just understood, said come and go as you please.
I was so proud of my children, actually, at the time, the younger children, because they've known Richard. They know Richard incredibly well. And it was over Christmas, and they just treated him as part of the family. And it was just it was just nice to be able to do that for Richard. Richard's one of these people who does so much for everyone else that it's just nice occasionally to be able to do something back.
What do you think that public intrusion, does to grief? I mean, you are a man who really understands that.
Well, it makes it hard to process, actually, because you become part of a wider story rather than dealing with your own grief, I think. I think that's part of it. And I think if I look at Richard in those circumstances, the absolutely disgraceful things that people were up to try and profit from his loss was so shocking. And it rang a few bells.
And everyone, regardless of their circumstances, goes a bit bananas in grief. I think it is a form of madness, actually. And well, you understood that, of course. And then you give people enough room to do their crazy thing. And
But it must be so difficult to process anger at the same time as grief, because there's a part of grief where you are livid to have lost somebody.
Well, I had an incident with a bloke on a moped, actually. So I was turning right onto the A510. It was a tricky turn in Findon. And I'd misjudged it, and a bloke on a moped came by, and I pulled out in front of him, and he had to brake, and then he did a very rude gesture at me. And I was actually wearing a dog collar, and then when he got close to see my dog collar, he pretended he was just kind of not doing a rude gesture because the dog collar freaked him out. But then I did a rude gesture back to him because I lost it, actually. But rude gestures from people in dog collars is not a great look. But it just, there are things in life which just shock you out of the everyday and the familiar, and you behave in peculiar ways, and, well, it just happens, doesn't it?
Charles is looking
Offensive.
contemplative.
Yeah, no, grief is such... Everyone listening to this has had grief on some level, probably many times. I'm amazed by the mechanics of grief, actually, and what it does to you. So it speeds up your day, it stops you sleeping, your brain becomes... it goes into overdrive in different directions, and you're dealing with the change forever, I think, and that's probably that's common to all of us, I think.
I think the only thing that happens is that everyone around you wants you to be better, as if you've had a cold or something, but it's not that sort of a thing. You don't get better, you just learn to live with it. So sometimes they're a bit disappointed and a bit frustrated with you because it would suit them if you were just better, right? And that is a bit interesting, and that needs a bit of managing.
Yes, and I remember you saying at the time that somebody advised you that, nobody will ever be as nice to you as now when you've just been widowed.
Best advice I got was from a widow on the day David died, and she said exactly that. Just everyone will be really nice, you have to make the most of it. It's a bit of practical help.
Yeah, I think I just want to be really because I thought your book, The Madness of Grief, was really brilliant. Actually,
sensational
Richard.
book.
Yeah, really good and
Thank you.
beautifully written. And if I actually listened to it rather than reading it, and I thought it was brilliant. So if anybody is in that sort of going through that experience at the moment, I can honestly say that I'd recommend your book. I thought it was really compelling.
I was telling him that literally an hour ago,
Were you?
saying how good it was.
That's
yeah.
both you and I who've been
Yes.
nice to him. That's ridiculous. Let's
Well, I
stop.
had just bought him lunch.
Yes.
I thought it was completely average. I'm only joking. I'm only joking.
And
It
I've
was
always thought
lovely.
you're average too, Fee.
Thank you.
Well, there we are. It's been said before. You don't have to take that, Fiona. Gay marriage. Where are you with the Church of England now? Because this blessing marriage fandango is it's such. I mean, I can say this in this space on this radio station. It's such a classic Church of England fudge that's got nobody anywhere.
Yeah. Anglican fudge should be sold at every fete, I think. It's a tentative move in a direction that those of us who want more inclusion welcome, but it doesn't actually change anything at all. It is that classical angle of giving the appearance of a movement of change, but actually nothing has really changed. So remains to be seen where it'll go, and it's all about the direction of travel. But don't expect anything decisive soon, because we just don't work.
And isn't it extraordinary? I mean, I've never met as many gay people in an organisation as in the Anglican Church. And I say that absolutely openly and thrilled that that's the case. So why do they lacerate themselves with this on top of it? It's so strange.
Well, I mean, it's complicated, and it's about. The argument is not really about sexuality. The argument is about authority. Who gets to decide what's in and what's out? That's what it's really about. And that one, that argument has happened in one form or another since the very beginning of things.
But can you explain to people listening how it must have felt to you to not be able to celebrate your love for David within the place that you had chosen to spend so much of your life and dedicate your life to?
Well, we did celebrate our love in that place, but mostly through being in the pantomime, which is a rather different thing. But anyway, that's what we did. But in church, it's just not. I mean, it was necessary for us to maintain the discipline, or sometimes the appearance of the discipline, in order for me to do my job, which was to be the vicar of Findon. And I love being the vicar of Findon. It's a great job. It's a lovely community, and I just had to find a way of doing that. It's funny enough, only when I retired did I realise quite what it does to you to have to somehow put a face on something which is unconscionable, and I'm not prepared to do it anymore.
But you're still a member of the Church of
I'm
England.
still a priest, yeah, and I'm still I'm still able to serve in that capacity. It's just I don't know where de-vicaring is weird. It's one of those roles that defines you, and you only realise when you stop doing it how much it has defined you. So I'm trying to work out what it's like to not be a vicar anymore. Don't smile at strangers in your own village in the way you would as a vicar. It just looks sinister.
You'll find yourself arrested. If you're
Well,
not careful.
again.
Can we talk coronation? Do you, the Spence? Do they have a sort of? I've been reading about this bizarre thing where apparently aristocratic folk can apply for a role occupied by one of their ancestors at the coronation.
Goodness.
Well, do the Spencers not have? I mean, you've been highly successful sheep farmers since
Yes,
the
we
16th century.
Did our bit with the sheep. I think we'd never had an official role in it. We just turned up like everyone else used to when it was the hereditary peers in the House of Lords. So obviously that's no longer the case. So there is some old coronet knocking around somewhere, but I won't be wearing it soon, I don't think.
So,
You know
will you not be going?
I wouldn't have thought so. I think it's only about 2,000 people going.
Because I think the last coronation, I think there were 8,000
That's right.
peers or something. Or
Yeah.
not, just
8,000 guests,
yeah, including all
witnesses
the
or whatever it is.
You know the Dimmicks of Scrivelsby?
No.
Well, when I was in
Do you know
Bosch...
them, Fee?
Yes, I do.
Well, no, the Dimmicks of Scrivelsby...
They
so-
come over most weekends, Jane.
it's a family, and they're in Lincolnshire, in the wolds of Lincolnshire, where I used to be a vicar years ago. And they are the hereditary kings or queens champions. And their hereditary job is to ride a horse into the banqueting hall and throw a gauntlet down. And they've done it since, I think, the 12th century. So I don't know if there'll be much of that going on at the coronation banquet of King Charles.
Can I just ask you, Charles, what I mean, I imagine your feelings on that day might be quite mixed. I mean, I'll be totally honest with you. Those of us with memories of your sister Diana, I think many of us, my generation, Fee's generation, we'll be thinking of her. And I hope that is not offensive, but I think she'll be in our minds.
I think it's very complimentary, actually. But I mean, obviously, I think of Diana every day, but in different contexts. And the whole royal thing doesn't really. It's not. I don't find it as interesting as a lot of people. Do you know what I mean? I just get on with my life, and I look after what I have to look after in the estate, and I have a career and write books, etc. So I don't really. People obviously assume that I care, a lot about that side of things, but it's just a side
But
part of my life.
would you like to ride your horse into the banquet and throw a gauntlet down?
Only if you were there to look really jealous, Richard, because I know you would prefer to do it.
I could wear a tabard.
That
maybe
was going to
have
be
a
my next
trumpet.
question. Surely there's a role for Richard at the coronation.
If there isn't, he'll doing his own little ceremony at home, I
I'm
think.
going to get nowhere. There's a ring of steel I'd never get through.
Are you going to be like Boris Johnson at a photo shoot? Just make sure that you're in the line of the camera all the way
I
down.
wouldn't get that near. I'd be taken out by security long before then.
Well, I'm glad to see you both. I thought it was a very interesting listen. And
Thank
it's
you.
the old, I've just completely lost the title of it, the Rabbit Hole
Detectives.
The Old Rabbits, I was going to call it, which would be
Thank
highly
you.
offensive. The Rabbit Hole Detectives, and it's out now, it's fleshy. It's called the Rabbit Hole Detectives. It's a new history podcast, and it's hosted by, I think I've got her title right, she's a bioarchaeologist,
Yeah.
Dr. Kat Jarman. And are you still a Reverend, Richard Coles?
Still a reverend, although hovering on the brink of disgrace.
Right. Also the king of cosy crime and a Radio 4 jock. And he's in the company of his old neighbour in Northamptonshire, Charles Spencer. Earl Spencer, welcome to the programme. Lovely to see you both.
Thank you. No, thrilling to be here.
Now, you're actually genuine friends, aren't you? Because Richard has a habit, Charles, I don't know if you know this, of just picking up sort of useful showbiz
Well,
pals.
yes,
but are you a friend?
I was so relieved to meet Richard. It was at a really grim drinks party in Northamptonshire, which is our patch, both of us. And I saw a Vicar Hove interview and I thought, oh, here we go. And he turned out to be very entertaining and told me a bit about his past. He's very shy, Richard. You have to push things
You
out
do
of
have to
him.
prise him open, don't you?
Like a clam. I think.
Such
Yes.
an edit of the conversation we had there, but that's not
Well,
even...
your
It was a
version
very,
is-
can I say, it was a hugely inappropriate conversation to have with the vicar. But I knew we'd be friends after that.
Can you give us a hint as to what the subject matter was?
I was,
Maybe just in mime, if you need
Yes,
to.
no, he mentioned that he had a male partner.
Yeah.
And I said, are you celibate? And he gave me a very direct answer. So I thought we get on quite well, and we always have ever since.
This was at an event organised by the High Sheriff of Northamptonshire. I've done my research.
Well,
and,
actually, I was chaplain to the High Sheriff.
so
and
that gives you licence to be really, really rude.
Well,
at
really
one of their
inappropriate.
functions.
You're
Yeah.
in a situation. I mean, it's a fact. We should do a podcast about it, but it's a sort of county thing. So if you're involved in the life of the county, high sheriffs and lord lieutenants, that kind of thing, there's always a knees up, and you can always set a knees up because everyone brings a sword. But I didn't get a sword because.
I was sword light that day as well. But
I
it was.
got a tricorn hat though.
I know, but you weren't asked to. You just put it on.
Well, and also try and get a tricorn hat. And then I borrowed one from the Panto, but I had to get David to unpick the skull and crossbones because it was Long John Silver's. But in the photographs of the procession, you can quite clearly see the outline of the skull and crossbones on my.
I was just in a
tricorn
suit, rather understated.
I just love the fact that the detail is everyone has a sword. I mean, have you got a sword that you can just pick up before you leave the house?
The Garvey family don't carry swords on a Monday. I thought you'd know that, Fee. I'm determined to get to the meat of today's conversation, which is theory, a talk about your podcast, which we are going to do at the start. So
Well-
this is the Rabbit Hole Detectives. How did it come about, Charles?
Well, Richard and Kat, the third presenter, Kat
Yeah.
Jarman, we're all quite good friends. And I don't know who suggested it, and it just sort of happened. But it is a problem because luckily it's in the title about rabbit holes. We do tend to wander off. So we each present a subject, each podcast, which is set by one of the others the previous week. And we have to be, I think, meant to be sort of vaguely entertaining and interesting. I think that's the idea. Which is seldom reached. But we tend to go down all sorts of strange areas of knowledge while discussing that. And then at the end, there's a disembodied voice who declares who's been the most interesting or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's not we're not competitive people, are we, Richard?
No, but I would say there's some issues over the marking, which I think for season 2 need to be addressed, possibly at the Hague European Court or something.
Well,
to say.
all I can say is when you get to the final episode, the way you pander and beg to win is not very seemly.
That's humiliating.
Oh, this is golden. They're going to fall out in a big way, Jane. Brilliant.
It's never happened. We don't know anything about that.
But
kind
he
of thing.
won. That's what's really... You shouldn't reward bad behaviour, but the producer did. Just
Well, I
saying.
think, some would say if they'd read any of Richard's work, that some of his bad behaviour has been very richly rewarded.
Well, thank you for
Yes.
that. I would say it sort of began because Charles, his on the estate at Altrop in Northamptonshire, they found a Saxon village. So Kat was digging it up. So she came to be an archaeologist, and then it was sort of after dig conversations that sort of led to this thing, because we're just all interested in lots of different things, and we have different but kind of
Interlocking.
slightly overlapping areas of. I have no expertise at all, but Charles is a historian, Kat's an archaeologist.
You did history at university, didn't
I
you?
did, but you
Yeah.
see, Richard has that extraordinary knowledge. My children one Christmas tested him on, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and he knew every there wasn't a theme that he didn't nail.
So annoying.
And then he also knows every obscure flag. He's just that person. He's
I was
pub
a
quiz
lonely
material.
child, a lonely, weird child.
You know all the saints as well, don't you?
I'm good on saints.
You're very good on saints.
Yeah, St Wulfric of Hazelbury today, patron saint of pattern cutters.
Patron. Does every single job have a patron saint?
Yeah, and there's no rule to stop you giving a patron saint to somebody. So, I mean, there's patron saints of the internet, there's patron saints of Tinder, there's patron saints of all sorts
There
of
isn't a
things.
patron saint of Tinder.
Yeah.
Well, who decides who that is?
Well,
Is it
anyone can. I mean, there are formal ways of doing this. This is the subject of our podcast.
Can I say it's exactly how it goes? And it just goes down these
I
mad.
mean, so the Roman Catholic Church or the Orthodox churches of the East would have methods of doing that. But saints were often made saints by acclamation, just by making a big splash in the local air. Charles has got an ancestor who's nearly a saint.
He is. What is
Aloysius.
he? Blessed, is he?
He's blessed. Yeah, he's one off a saint.
Ignatius. They're trying to find a second miracle, which would be a miracle in itself.
What was the first miracle?
Well, I think he helped somebody who had a tied tongue, but he didn't. I don't think he did, but they wanted to make him saintly, I think. And he was actually.
He died in a ditch,
Yes.
didn't
Yeah, he fell off a log and died in a ditch. But before that, he had a very distinguished religious career like Richard.
In Northamptonshire.
Well, actually, he took his message, he became Catholic and then joined the Passionists, which is the sort of extreme wing of Jesuitism, and prayed for the reconversion of England to Catholicism. And anyway, they thought that was good.
And then fell off a log.
And then that was it.
Right. Can we just get to the Tower of London, because I'm pointing as though this helps anybody listening. It doesn't. But the Tower of London isn't that far from where we're sitting right now, the other side of the
Yes.
Thames. I think it's the most frightening place I've ever been to.
Well, for good reason.
I went there at night once and I couldn't get out of the place quick enough.
It's blood-
You've got a good fact, Richard, so just bring it to life for us.
So here's a typical thing. We were talking about execution methods. Charles is expert. Charles wrote about the regicides, the people who were responsible for the death of Charles I, who later met sticky ends themselves.
I think the subject of the Robert Harris's new book.
Oh, I
Act
think
of
so, yeah.
Oblivion. Yeah.
He's taken two of the ones I've dealt with and turned them into fictionalised characters.
Right, yeah. Sorry, carry on, Richard.
Well, my friend Christian plays the organ at St Peter ad Vincula, which is the parish church for the Tower of London. And the bloke who looks after the vicar there has a kitchen, and on the kitchen there's a table. And that was the table on which they used to take the just beheaded and sew their heads back on. Not all of them, not everyone got that privilege, but some, Charles I, although that was in Whitehall, they had the heads sewn back on for burial. So you could sit there having, I don't know, a pot noodle or something round the table, or a slice of Battenberg, and actually thinking, well, on this table, the severed heads of beheaded grandees were reattached to their body. That's the sort of thing we talk about.
And also, what's so strange, and this is actually not in the podcast, but being executed with an axe is incredibly painful.
I heard that bit.
Yes, so
It's
it was thought of as this great compliment to high-born people who are going to be executed. But the rope, if you got it right, was a much quicker exit.
Really?
And one of the things that I learnt from that podcast was the fact that the guillotined heads do still move, show emotion, because for a couple of...
For a few seconds, I got a doctor friend who said that your brain would still be functioning, feeling pain, etc., for a few seconds after the blade had done its work.
Yeah, Lavoisier, the chemist who was guillotined in the Terror, arranged with an assistant to count the number of times he blinked after the blade fell. So it was an experiment to see how long he could operate the apparatus of his face after the head was detached.
So when Jane and I get together outside of work, sometimes we talk about TV. Usually we just read about people who work at Radio 4. Is this the kind of chat that you two have together?
It is actually.
Is it?
It is.
I mean, we've done paper clips.
Yes.
We've done dachshunds, we've done
Pub
neckties,
names.
pub names.
Yeah. So we start with a vaguely interesting theme and then broaden it out. I think that's really what we're trying to do. And as Richard said, we're very complimentary. So Kat Jarman is a proper academic, particularly in the Viking Age. And Richard's got this general knowledge, and I have quite specific areas. But between the three of us, it's quite good. And also the good thing about Kat is that she stops us just being like two ridiculous friends
And,
chatting.
and she's Norwegian. So there's a whole new thing that she brings to it with her Norwegianness. So she told us, we did one on paper clips, and we learned about Operation Paperclip, which was a resistance movement in Norway, which we didn't know about at
Which
all.
her grandfather was involved in, I think.
We also found out that, do you know what the French for a paperclip is?
Go on.
Trombone.
Of course.
Because what does a
of course.
paperclip look
It looks
like?
a bit like a trombone. Gosh, I don't know about you, listener. I'm learning such a lot.